Hello and welcome back to the Conflict Skills Podcast. I'm your host, professional mediator Simon Good. I set up this podcast to provide free resources and tools for dealing with conflict, so if that sounds like the kind of thing that's useful for you, please consider pressing subscribe. Sincere apologies for the delay in between episodes this time round. It's actually the third or fourth time that I've been trying to record this one, and they're always a little bit tricky. I'm going to be discussing a case study that I was sent by a listener. In this case, it's Emma, and she's talking about conflict that happened between her husband and her best friend. It sounds like there was a particularly vitriolic argument that erupted during a dinner or a visit or something along those lines, and her friend's kids were doing something that her husband disagreed with. And this also might be connected to the fact that her friend is homeschooling the kids that are involved. Anyway, it sounds like an argument erupted with the husband effectively criticizing the way that Emma's friend was disciplining her kids in terms of the parenting, etc. And so this has resulted in quite a bit of tension and ongoing drama, and it sounds like her friend is still quite upset about what's happened. She mentions the fact that her husband and her have both tried to apologize, but this hasn't seemed to have fixed the issue. So that's the topic that I'm going to be talking about today, is that case study, and I'll read what Emma said to describe it in a little bit more detail, and then talk about some of the different themes or elements that jump out at me anyway, including some of the options that Emma should consider. But the reason that this is the third or fourth time that I've been recording this is because, for whatever reason, I tend to experience quite a bit of pressure when I'm doing these case study type of episodes. And actually, I get sent quite a number of different scenarios from listeners of the podcast, which I always really enjoy getting, first of all. And I often indicate that I'd be quite willing to discuss this on a podcast. Sometimes I ask for a bit more information. But there's been quite a few times where I just drop the ball from there and I don't end up either recording the episode or pressing publish. And I think part of it is the challenge that I don't know all of the full information that's going on here. Like, I'm just reading a very shallow level of detail snapshot about the situation. I don't know the people that are involved, and I also don't know you. I don't know what your style is, what your values are, what your goals are for the relationship. So inherently, as I'm sort of talking about what jumps out at me about these case studies, is that there's a layer of my own self that gets transposed, I think, onto the top of this. And so I just want to name at the outset, I suppose, that just in light of the fact that I don't fully know all of the information, it's certainly not my intention to tell anybody else what to do. I try to avoid that where possible. You should do this or you should do that. Actually, I don't necessarily find this to be the most helpful way of supporting people either. Even when I do have an idea of what might work best, I still find there's benefit in coaching someone. Like, what do you think would work? Let's think about the situation in a bit more detail. Let's go through an exercise of doing some brainstorming and then develop a bit of a plan, including some preemptive problem solving, I think, at times as well. Like, if this happens, what are you going to do next? But none of that involves me saying you should do this. Whereas when I'm just talking into a microphone and I've just read an email, of course, it's going to be one directional. I am probably going to talk about what jumps out to me. So that means that I'm going to choose a couple of areas that I'm going to focus on. Today, I'm going to be talking about the types of apology, and when Emma talks about the fact that her husband has tried to apologize, but it hasn't fixed it, what might be going on here is that she's using the different type of apology than what the friend would resonate with or what the friend is wanting. I'm also going to talk about types of conflict and how we can deal with value conflict in particular, like decisions around parenting or homeschooling or discipline or norms in terms of children's expectations and what's appropriate responses and all this kind of thing. That would go into the category of values conflict. So I'm going to be talking about that. And then finally today, I'm going to be talking about some of the fundamental principles that we can use when we're in a position of being an accidental mediator. Like, in my role, I'm a professional mediator, so I spend quite a lot of time resolving conflict and disputes hands-on in organizations predominantly these days. But I also find myself in accidental mediator kind of situations from time to time as well. Family members who are in conflict, or two friends that might have had a disagreement, a number of different organizations that I've worked in. I'm kind of an informal mediator between staff and management, or between managers from different departments, or all of this kind of thing. And it's tricky there because you do want to think about options of what might help, but at the same time, you've got a limited ability to fix it, a limited amount of things that you can actually control. So as Emma talks about this conflict going on predominantly between her husband and her friend, well, she can't fix it. To some extent, she can't control other people's behavior, including her husband and including her friend. And to some extent, her friend is never going to fully understand her intentions. There's always the risk that how she communicates could be misconstrued or misinterpreted or that kind of thing as well. So all we can really do, I think, is to configure our intentions, that our goal is to see if we can come up with something that might help, but we need to be realistic in terms of our expectations, given the fact that we can't fully control this. It's a conflict or relationship ultimately between these two other people, and they might be very close people to us. So with that conflict, often it goes hand in hand with quite a high level of stress. So when I think about accidental mediator, the first challenge that we've got is how do we help the dynamics between these two people? And the second challenge that we've got is looking after ourselves during what is probably quite a stressful experience. And from what Emma's described, this situation does actually sound really full on. And there's a number of complicating factors that are going on here. So as I go through this case study, you might have come across similar experiences yourself, and maybe something that Emma shares or something that I talk about would resonate with you. But even if you're dealing with other kinds of conflict, like accidental mediator situations at work, for example, or conflict with someone else that you work with, or maybe one member of your team's put a client offside, and these kind of situations, you might be able to apply some of the same principles that I'll describe as well. If it's useful, I'd be incredibly grateful if you would consider leaving a positive review. And if you would like to send me a scenario that I can use for a case study analysis in a future episode of the podcast, you can shoot it to me by email. The best address is podcast@simongood.com. So Emma says that she listens to the podcast, really enjoys it, and a few other kind bits of feedback actually, which I really appreciate. And she says that one of the areas she's been looking at in particular is how to repair a friendship between a very good friend and your husband. And the phrase that she uses, when they've had a ripping argument. I'm just reading it here. A ripping argument. What a lovely way of articulating that tension and the destruction that often comes about of arguments as well. It's funny the different metaphors that we use when we talk about conflict. To me, they're often really interesting, like the arguments heating up. Well, I wonder if there's parallels to our own internal process, for example, like we're heating up as we can feel the heat rising to our cheeks as we get angry or something like that. Or maybe the heat is rising in some other very tangible kind of way, I suppose, in terms of the person's body temperature as they move into fight or flight mode or something like that. But ripping argument, it's a really interesting analogy, isn't it? Ripping argument. What was ripped? Is it the sense of connection, the sense of closeness, the something about the friendship that's been ripped? And it's interesting when we think about conflict, like the destruction often we think about as rip, and then the repair we often think about as mend, or you know what I mean? Like build a bridge across these two different divides or something similar. So I suppose Emma's ultimately looking for some advice in terms of re-sewing a relationship that's been ripped apart by the argument. And it sounds like it was actually quite a ugly and messy situation that happened. But with all of these kind of conversations and arguments that emerge, they're often the tip of the iceberg. And there's probably been some tension that was building up behind the scenes, maybe between you and your friend, or your husband and your friend. But it probably also may have been building up behind the scenes with all of you individually as well. Like maybe your friend feels like the decisions that they've made homeschooling their kids have also been criticized by other people in their life. So it's possible that they're a little bit hypervigilant to that as a topic. So when your husband talks about discipline, it's possible that your friend is hypersensitive to that given her other experiences with other people in her life. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's fair that your friend blames you for those other negative experiences that she's had, but her reaction to what you say will involve some kind of a complex blend of all of her history outside of her relationship with you, as well as her relationship in her history with you. So we can see that although this was the argument and this is the night that we're talking about, and there's opportunities to reflect on what we could have done differently, I think also this is kind of like a symptom that's just emerging from a system that had some tension building up in some way, if that makes sense. So she says that my husband criticized my friend's children and she's homeschooling them and cannot get over it. Interesting phrasing there, isn't it? Getting over conflict. We want them to get over it. And I'm going to come back and talk about that phrasing later as well. Things have been bad. I would like to reach out, but I'm also aware that I'm apologizing on my husband's behalf. It's a real dilemma, isn't it? I think that Emma's probably finding herself in there, that she wants to fix it and she wants to demonstrate the fact that her husband's sorry. Whether or not he is sorry, that's a separate kind of question. But you can't. Like, she's not going to be able to convince her friend that her husband feels a particular way or thinks a particular thing or understands a particular element. In fact, I think it's often actually better just to admit that although Emma wishes that she could apologize for her husband, she's aware that this might not help. Like, that's often a better thing to say to your friend than saying, they are sorry. I'm sure that they're sorry. I know that they're sorry deep down. I know that they're aware of it or something similar. As soon as we start arguing that you should think differently, obviously it encourages the other person to sometimes become more dug in, more black and white in terms of the way that they're thinking about the situation, which is literally the opposite of what we're aiming for, right? So this is a dilemma. She isn't sure whether she should reach out, and even if she does, effectively she's apologizing on her husband's behalf. She says, we've both left her text messages and apologize, but it seems that she still cannot get over it. So again, get over it. I don't think getting over it is the best way to think about conflict. It's one of the interesting things that I've needed to reflect on a lot myself because I run a business as a mediator. So what do you call training in conflict? I don't know whether it should be called conflict resolution because we're not really resolving conflict in a lot of ongoing relationships that we have. Should it be called conflict management? Maybe, but I mean, that sort of implies that we have a level of control over the conflict, whereas really I think it's probably more like conflict navigation or buffering the storms or trying to somehow plot a course across all of these uncertain events that are coming up that we're going to need to deal with. So all of those phrasings to me, like resolving conflict or managing conflict, imply far more closure than happens in reality, and it implies a far more active role that we have in influencing the situations that we're dealing with as well. So you're wanting your friend to get over it. That's quite an ask, you know. What does that even mean? That you want to dismiss the fact that they're upset, that you expect them to minimize the things that they're sensitive to? I think that phrasing, get over it, part of the reason why people react to it in a negative kind of way, which her friend might have if she said, can you please get over it, is that it does implies that you're wrong to think that way or you're wrong to feel that way. Whereas I much prefer phrasing along the lines of what would help you to move forward, what would help you to take a step in the right direction, what would help us to reestablish closeness, what would help you to feel comfortable spending time with me. So I'm not implying there that you're wrong to feel the way that you're feeling or that you're wrong to think what you're thinking. What I'm saying is I don't want to be stuck here. I don't want this to be the way that it continues moving forward. I would like things to be different. And I think we can talk about, I'd love there to be a higher level of closeness or connection, or I'd like to do what it takes to move things in the direction where we start to rebuild trust between the two of us. You're sort of also highlighting then the desired state. I want things to be this way. You know, it's the G in the grow coaching. It's to focus on the goal as the first step. But you're there indicating your willingness and your desire for things to be moving in this direction. Whereas when we say what's going to help you to get over it, I think it implies that you're wrong at the moment and you need to change. It's also one of the things that's really relevant when we think about grief. People don't like being told, get over it, of course. We don't want to forget the person that we've lost, this kind of thing. And, you know, you need to move on. It's a similar kind of thing, whereas what would help to move forward, that tends to be a much more helpful way of phrasing it with the other person. But I actually think this also affects the way that we think about conflict as well. Is your job to resolve conflict? Maybe. Is your job to manage conflict? I guess so. Maybe your job is to navigate conflict and to do your best to support the people around you and to show up as your best self, to be reasonable in the midst of an ongoing unreasonable situation with some of these people. I think a lot of the time when I look back and I regret the actions that I've taken when it comes to conflict, it's because I've become too wrapped up in the immediate short-term results or too wrapped up in worrying about other people's perspectives of me or judging myself harshly for mistakes that I've made or whatever else it might be. I think taking a more open-ended approach to conflict is more helpful. So even you saying, I need to think about what's going to help things to move forward with this person, it encourages your reflection to be different than what would help me to help this person get over it. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like then our expectation is much more realistic, that things are the way that they are. And I'm more focused on this short term. What's the next step? What's the best way to respond? How can I avoid reacting and making things worse and all that kind of stuff? So Emma says, I'm thinking of leaving her another message, but I'm wondering if you have an episode where you address this kind of thing. And so that's what I'm talking about today. So I think one of the factors there that Emma could consider is the different types of apology. She says that my intention was to say that we both apologise for what my husband said and how it made her feel, but we also don't want to be responsible for anyone else beside ourselves. It seems like that's an important point to clarify. So I think that's probably something to do with the difference in expectations that she has with her friend. I do think you could probably clarify that, but it would really be about clarifying expectations in terms of behaviour. Like we'd love to have you guys around for dinner again. I'm happy not to talk about parenting or homeschooling or any of those kind of issues. Like there's no reason why we need to butt our nose into the decisions that you're making about the kids. Would it be okay though that maybe you could ask them not to climb on the furniture? Or if they'd like something to eat, could they come and ask us and I'll grab it from the cupboard rather than them going and helping themselves? Like we're trying to frame the issue in a very behavior focused kind of way. And it's in a mutual and neutral kind of phrasing. Like, let's get on the same page in terms of how we're going to look after the food for the kids, as opposed to, I want to hear what you're going to do to discipline your kids when they come and steal things from our cupboard or something similar. Like obviously when it's positioned towards the other person and focused on the past, it tends to evoke much more resistance and defensiveness. Whereas saying something like, it would be really helpful for me to be clear on the way that we're going to be managing X and Y. Sure, I think there's an opportunity to clarify some of that. And maybe she does have unrealistic expectations of you. She expects you're going to just clean up after the kids and they're making a massive mess through your house 3 nights a week or something, then fair enough. I think it's probably appropriate that you discuss the boundaries and expectations and that kind of stuff. I'm wondering though how that goes alongside the apology. If you're aware that there's tension and drama and a rift that still exists, maybe in the short term, your focus should be on that relationship repair, empathy, validation, acknowledgement, and you can maybe postpone some of those decisions about the kids' behavior when they're at your house or whatever else the other tangible areas are that you actually need to discuss. Sort of do them as needed, if you know what I mean. Realistically, it might not be worth going into a whole bunch of level of detail when the other person's going to be very escalated, because they're stressed because it's the first time they're back in your house or the first time you're talking or you've just called them out of the blue or something else might have put them on edge, if that makes sense. You're not going to have them show up in a very logical, rational kind of way when they're experiencing a lot of emotion. So the first time that you're talking, if you haven't talked for a few weeks or something, that might not be the time to go into that complex level of detail. So Emma then says, it also seems important to mention that my husband said that kids, including her children, don't have etiquette these days. I really like the fact that Emma had included that direct quote from her husband because, gosh, I can almost hear it coming out of my own mouth in many situations that I've been in. I mean, we hang out with extended family or friends at times, and there are very different norms, as I've discovered, in terms of what's expected of kids' behaviours. But I'm also shocked by the huge variety in the way that people talk to their kids. My son is 9 and I talk to him like he's intelligent. When there's a problem with something, I kind of just try and discuss it. Like, what do you think would work, mate? Yeah, fair enough. You forgot your hat. I bet you probably felt like everyone was looking at you, did you? But I'm not talking to him like the way that the Wiggles talk to infants, like, oh, you had a bad day at school. Well, that is going to happen someday. You need to understand that not every day is going to be a good day. Like, I hear the way that some of these other parents talk to their kids, and I don't so much care about the discipline kind of stuff. Like, I mean, I've got a pretty open-ended approach to discipline myself, and so I don't really have very tight expectations. I'm probably the one that other people are thinking, shouldn't you step in and do something here? Whereas I'm like, let the kids figure it out, they'll be right. But I really don't like the infantile way that a lot of people talk to their kids that are in that 5 to 15 kind of age group. It just strikes me as so absurd. And these people seem to be puffing out their chest and preening about what legendary parents they are because they're talking like this exaggerated, like, I don't know if it's Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or something that's just people are looking for a good approach to parenting. And so they see these people as role models or something. But anyway, for me, it just makes me cringe. But I mean, what am I going to do about all of that? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily my role to jump in and tell other people what to do. It never works. If you suggest, something that's really worked for me and the person feels like you're criticizing their parenting, I would say that there's an absolute 0% chance that they're going to listen to any of the ideas that you've got. So the dilemma here, unfortunately, is that even when you do have a good idea or a helpful suggestion or a strategy that the other person could use, as a colleague parent, it's very difficult to give somebody feedback or suggestions without it coming across as criticism. It's something that people are hypersensitive to. I'm wondering if maybe they're aware of it. Like if you've got a number of kids that all have behavioral problems, well, it's possible that you're realizing that a common factor might be the way that you talk to them, for example, but that's not necessarily what's causing it. Do you know what I mean? So it's just such a contentious, complex issue for a lot of people. A lot of the time, I think the best strategy when we're dealing with these kind of issues is just to kind of agree to disagree, if you know what I mean. And when we think about something like etiquette, good manners, what's appropriate behavior in a particular setting, these are all subjective perspectives that we've developed because of the things that have happened to us. Like a lot of us inherit these values from our parents, and so we think that that's what's right and that's what should happen, and that's our definition of good and correct, so to speak. But a lot of the time, I think we just are influenced by our environment, and what we're almost programmed to do as humans is to identify and reprimand people that step outside of the norm. So I think a lot of people just become unconsciously reinforcing the system that they're in, if you know what I mean. They're not even aware of what's going on, but they see the things that are going on around them as normal and what should happen. So when they see something that's different, it triggers this kind of like almost robotic autopilot response of you shouldn't be doing that or don't do that, this kind of thing. Sometimes people have more of a thought through approach. Like maybe your husband has thought through child development and they've studied psychology and education and developmental theory and all of these kind of aspects. And maybe there are more long-term longitudinal studies that I'm aware of in terms of what parenting approach is better in which situation. But I don't think any of us know what's best for our kids in a lot of these situations long-term. It's impossible to know the long-term effect on someone of something that happens to them. This injury that a child sustains might be the thing that helps them to develop resilience, and then that carries them through other hardships that they'll face later on in their life, if you know what I mean. So how much challenge should kids be exposed to? How much feedback should they get from their parents? Of course, we all agree that you shouldn't micromanage your kids' behavior and jump down their neck every time they step out of line, even very slightly, like tying their shoelaces wrong and they get a slap on the wrist. Sure, we all agree that that's not good, and we all agree that letting kids do anything that they want anytime is not good, but there's a pretty broad brush middle ground there of subjective interpretations of situations, and we're all going to have a slightly different idea about what should happen. So this idea of etiquette, I think people put far too much weight on that, and even when you can see what you think are the direct effects of not having etiquette, like when kids don't have this kind of discipline, this is the negative impact that happens to them long term. It's just so complicated. There's so many other variables that are involved there. I actually am not sure what this idea of etiquette is so helpful for. I don't find it that helpful even explaining it to my son, like why you should treat people well. Part of it, I think, is just because it's the right thing to do. It's like my moral code that It's the way that I orient myself with the world and my understanding of people and humans and what we're here for. I can also let him know, though, that there's a reciprocal effect of the way that we treat other people. So as he develops good habits about looking after other people, he's going to find that this becomes a blessing for him as he moves through life. If he's generous, he'll get a reputation of being generous and people will begin to look after him. On the other hand, he needs to learn this himself, because if you become too generous, then people will take advantage of you. And so me as a parent, I really step back and try to think, this is part of him figuring out how to manage these situations. So when my son doesn't display good manners or good etiquette, there's probably a whole bunch of reasons why. It might be how he's feeling on the day, that he's hungry, that he needs to go to the toilet, that he's sore, that he's embarrassed, that he's sweaty and uncomfortable. It might be that he's tired. It might be that he feels like I'm rejecting him, ignoring him, isolating him in some way. He might feel a bit humiliated or let down by me in some way that I'm not aware of. Like, these are such complex dynamics that are going on in terms of his behavior. And yet when we see other people doing something, we immediately think that we know why they're doing it and we know whether or not they should be doing it, therefore, as a result. So, when we get caught up, I think, on things like etiquette, it ends up not necessarily leading to any fruitful conversations between people. Whereas asking your friends something like, what do you think's going on for the kids at the moment? They seem a bit stirred up, or they seem a bit wired. Is everything all right? What kind of a day have you had? What would be helpful for them at the moment then? Do they need some quiet time, or do they need some food? Or would you like to give them a shower before you guys go home? Or it's like really thinking through from a kid's perspective, what are the multiple things that might be contributing to their behavior, and what are they needing then in terms of structure or support moving forward? None of that involves a judgment of that behavior is wrong. There's no etiquette. They don't have good manners and all of this kind of thing. So I suppose that's the thing that jumps out at me of that particular phrase of kids don't have good manners these days. What people are often talking about there is a drift in social cohesion, or a drift in what they expect in terms of communication norms or that kind of thing. And I mean, we can talk about all of those types of things and even reconfigure our expectations if needed. But, just complaining that the other people are doing the wrong thing by saying something like they don't have good manners, it's usually not a very helpful conversation, in my opinion. So Emma says that she believes that her friend has added us to a vast pool of people who have said this to her children about a lack of etiquette, lack of manners, and we're about to be lumped in with everyone else who has wronged her. I think this is quite an insightful way that Emma has put that. It is certain that the way that her friend is interpreting Emma's communication is to do with all of her other experiences up until that point, including the interactions that we've had with other people, including the interactions where other people have been jerks to her, like not you. So other people might have been really over the top and crossed the line, really jumped the gun, making assumptions without the full information, not you. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to cop the full brunt of that at times, as you are lumped in with the other people. Now that's, I think, to some extent inevitable in the short term. People's reactions are about the past. So Emma will find that when she talks to her friend is interpreting that through the lens of what other people have said to her and what other people have done to her. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's where it needs to stop. So I suppose from Emma's perspective, I often talk about thinking about the process rather than the event. Like, I don't know what words are going to work for Emma to talk this through with her friend, but when Emma says something, her friend is probably going to experience an immediate reaction, which might be high levels of emotion, a flash of anger, thoughts of defensiveness, or something like that. And so that's where I think Emma probably initially wants to focus on de-escalation, low tone of voice, slow speed, really framing things in a neutral and mutual kind of way. It seems like there were some crossed wires. I'm sorry that there was so much tension during dinner the other night. I'm sorry that we left things on such a bad note. So all of that kind of stuff, it's kind of acknowledging the elephant in the room to some extent, but I'm not implying that you're wrong. It's not like you need to get over it or what would help you to get over it. It's kind of saying, I'm sorry that there's been so much tension between the two of us lately. I'm sorry that we seem to have lost a bit of connection that we had when I look back to how things were even 3 months ago. So it's that neutral, mutual way of phrasing, the low tone of voice, low speed, slow volume, and that kind of stuff, regardless of how else the conversation plays out. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's possible that her friend will have these continual rises in emotion, again and again, reactions during a conversation when they're talking about something that's quite sensitive for them. And it is literally about all of those other people who have criticized them in the past. And there's probably nothing that you can do to avoid it. It's like surfing the wave. We just need to slip back into de-escalation mode, listen, empathize, open-ended questions, allow silence as needed. And that might be a number of times through the same conversation, or again and again at the beginning of conversations when you see your friend, the first few times after there's been drama and tension between the two of you. We can't plan for what's going to set them off, but if we're talking about sensitive topics, it's very likely that they will be set off. So I'm thinking ahead of time about the kinds of things that I can do to calm the situation down, to lower that energy level, to lower that level of heat, so to speak. And what we're doing there is prevent the ripping from happening as the argument continues to develop. Now, Emma said that both she and her friend have apologized. She and her husband have apologized to her friend, but her friend still hasn't gotten over it. So I wonder if that also might be connected to the way that they've been apologizing, and then the way that this may have been interpreted by a friend. I tend to think about 5 different types of apology. We would all use different words, and there's different phrasings that would be normal for you dealing with the people that you're friends with. Like, some people are very casual. It'd be like, hey man, I'm so sorry about that. Sorry, bros, or whatever. Other people would be like, look, I really would like to apologize, much more formally. It would depend on your relationship in terms of the words that you use, etc. But there tends to be these 5 categories, I guess, of apologies. So the first type of apology is just to say, I'm sorry. Here we could say something like, I'm sorry if it came across like we were criticizing decisions that you'd made as a parent. I'm sorry if you feel like you weren't being listened to. I'm sorry if you felt like we were making assumptions or jumping to conclusions. I'm sorry if it came across that I was overreacting to the situation. So we could apologize for something that we did in a genuine kind of way. You might just be saying, look, I'm sorry if it came across this way, or I'm sorry if this was the way that it might have been perceived. But I'm not saying like you're silly for thinking about it in that way. I'm saying, look, it probably did come across that was too full on our end. We probably did seem like we were overstepping the mark in terms of telling you what to do. So I'm saying that probably did happen. I'm not saying, I'm sorry that we made you feel that way. I'm saying, look, I fully acknowledge that this might have been interpreted that way, and if that's the case, I'd like to apologize. I'm sorry, I apologize. That's the first bit. And some people really want that from you. They want an apology, and that's often the phrase that they want, the word sorry. The second type of apology that we could use is to say something like, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. You might say something in this situation like, we shouldn't have criticized you for your parenting decisions. You might even say, we don't know what's going on. You're the one that knows the kids better than us. So we're interpreting their behavior at a very shallow level. I just want to acknowledge that we don't really know what's going on for them, even though during that conversation it probably came across like we were the experts. So it's like, I shouldn't have done that either because the action is wrong or because that wasn't appropriate to the situation. Like, I didn't have all of the information, or I rushed in, or I might have done something wrong in terms of the process, if you know what I mean. So that's the second type of apology. The first is, I'm sorry. The second is, I was wrong. The third is something along the lines of, I'm not going to do that again. Some people, again, really want this, and it's often a helpful step, I think, in reestablishing trust. Like, if you come round to our house again for dinner, or next time you're round, next time we see you, if you would prefer just to leave this as is and not go into the conversation anymore, that's perfectly fine with me. We can talk about many other things without discussing parenting, and after all, it's not our role to tell you what you should be doing. So I might say, I'm not going to talk about the topic again. Or I might say, I'm not going to criticize you anymore. I'm not going to rush in. Or the next time that the conversation begins to get heated, I've talked to my husband about him going outside so that he can cool off. Like, maybe you've got a strategy that you have in mind for managing the other things that led up to that situation that caused the other person to be hurt. So you could say, I'm not going to do it. I think people often like being told these are the steps that I've taken to stop it from happening, or this is the alternative that I'm going to do when that happens, this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's a gesture of our intention, if you know what I mean. Now, whether or not that's reassuring for the other person, I think that's often connected to the level of trust. If they think that you're going to renege and you're going to go back on your word, then it probably doesn't mean much. If there was a level of closeness and there still exists some level of trust between the two of you, then maybe that is something that would resonate. So we could say, I'm sorry. We could say, that was wrong. We could say, I'm not going to do that again. The fourth type of apology is to say something like, how can I make it up to you? In this kind of situation, Emma might say something like, literally, how can I make it up to you? I'd love to take you out for lunch. I'd love to take you to your favorite bakery up the road. Can I bring some muffins around to your place if that's easier rather than you having to travel? I know that you're flat out over the next couple of weeks. Could I help out with childcare? Would it be helpful for me to do this, do your washing for you or organize this trip? Or maybe there's some tangible way that you can give them something. And it might be practical assistance. It might be a written card or flowers. It might be taking them out for dinner or some other significant ceremony almost that exists between the two of you. This would really depend on the person that you're dealing with, but that's the fourth type of apology, something like, what can I do to make it right? What can I do to make it up to you? Given the fact that it's caused you this negative impact, is there anything that I can do to help? That kind of thing. And then the final type of apology is something along the lines of, would you please forgive me? Now, Emma has repeatedly used that phrase, get over it. I don't think that's the best way to phrase it. I think here I would be inclined to say something like, what would help us to move forward? What would help for us to reestablish just the beginnings of trust in our relationship? You might need some time right now, but I'd love to reestablish connection when you're in the right headspace. I'm open to whatever's going to work for you. If you want to meet somewhere public, or I can come to your place, or you can come here. If you want to just do a quick hangout, have a coffee or something, that's perfectly fine. If you'd be willing to bring the kids around for dinner, that's perfectly fine as well. And I might talk to my husband about clarifying expectations in terms of behavior and what he might need to do to manage the levels of frustration. But, that's something for him to figure out. And when you're ready to come around again, we can work together so that you feel comfortable doing that. So I'm kind of saying, let's move things forward. I would like things to improve. Maybe Emma would say something like, could you forgive me? What would it take to forgive me? I think it might be better to say something like, what do you need to hear to know that we're sorry? Or is there something that we can do to let you know that we are listening to your perspective, that we've taken it on board, that we've adjusted or responded to the feedback that you've given, something like that? Sometimes there is something that she comes back with, yes, I want you to do this, but it's really, I think, about the gesture as well. It's saying, look, I'm open. I'm positive. I would like things to be different. I'm not jumping the gun. I'm not trying to put pressure on you. You can do it when you're ready. Let me know what you need. What would it take? What would be helpful moving forward? And then where there's a boundary that's crossed, like the kids are on your couch jumping up and down, or she leaves and leaves you to look after the kids for hours at a time, and that's not something that you agreed to, or whatever the thing is that's going on, try to focus on the behavior. Instead of the kids have no etiquette type of approach of you're wrong, you're a bad parent, there's obviously a problem with these kids, focus on the behavior. Would you mind asking them to hop off the couch? If they're going to throw, they can do that, but they'll have to go outside. This is the best place for them to do it. Do you want me to give them a yell when dinner's nearly ready or something like that? So it's focus on the behavior, and we move into that collaborative problem-solving kind of approach of this can't continue or this needs to change. What's the best option for managing this? How are we going to figure this out? Look, it's probably not going to work if the kids just go in and get themselves food from the cupboard. Would you mind asking them to let me know when they're hungry and I can make them something to eat? Are there any problems with that on your end? And then realistically, the kids still might wander into the cupboard, but we do our best then to problem solve and manage it as best we can. And are we resolving the conflict? Probably not. Are we managing the conflict? Good luck when we're talking about kids that are involved and other people's parenting and that kind of stuff. maybe our realistic goal for those types of interactions is that we try to navigate the conflict with grace, with compassion towards other people as well as to ourselves at times. Not being a doormat that we get walked over the top of and we need to just constantly keep everybody else happy. There's a middle ground there of standing up for yourself and holding on to boundaries and that kind of thing. But there might be other areas where we can let it go and acknowledge the fact that it's certainly frustrating in the moment and it's very annoying when there's other kids jumping on our couch, and it's almost like this inevitable emotional reaction that we go on when we see something that we've worked for damaged or whatever else it might be. But in the grand scheme of things, this is not going to be the kind of thing that we remember on our deathbed. Like, we're not going to wish that we'd told those kids not to jump on the couch. I think many of us would wish that we were more kind, more wise, more patient. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things that can be helpful for finding a middle ground there is that focus on behavior. Instead of labels like they don't have etiquette or they've got bad manners, focus on behavior. Like, this is the third time that this has happened. Would you mind doing this differently? This needs to stop. Could you do this instead? Look, in terms of that value conflict, I think that's ultimately the best that we can do. It's to choose the stuff that we can let go through to the keeper, and where we do need to respond, it's thinking about the behavior and then deciding how assertive that we need to be. So I hope that that's been helpful for Emma if you do happen to listen to this episode, as well as for other people who have tuned in. As I said, if you've got a case study that you would like me to discuss in a future episode of the podcast in a similar kind of way, you can send it to podcast@simongood.com. And otherwise, we'll hopefully see you again in a future, not too distant episode of the Conflict Skills Podcast. Thanks again. Bye for now.